The only garbage I see floating out there is just supporters.
So let's get back to the one big beautiful bill, because the NFA was directly involved with this for a while. It looked like we were going to get certain items outside the scope of the National Firearms Act, which had been heavily regulated since 1934. And brief history for our listeners who are unfamiliar with the National Firearms Act of 1934. It's a knee-jerk reaction to the St. Valentine's Day massacre. And basically Congress gets together and they put together this list of all these super scary items, right? Your silencer suppressors, short-barreled shotguns, short-barreled rifles, fully automatic weapons, destructive devices, the any other weapon category. And they say if you want to own one of these items, if you want the privilege as peasants to own one of these items, you have to register them with the federal government and you've got to pay a tax.
Yes.
And what people might not understand is that the tax being $200 on many of these items was cost prohibitive back in those days.
Yes.
I wasn't alive in 1934. My dad always tells me that hot dogs cost a nickel in Coney Island when he was growing up. And the average family car in 1934 cost about $550 to put it into perspective. So $200 just to be able to buy one of these things was out of the question for these people. And really is the first major piece of federal gun control legislation that we saw in our country's existence. So we've had this around for quite some time, where you register the item with the ATF, you pay your tax, you get proof that you've paid that tax, imposed as a taxing scheme.
Yes, as a taxing scheme. That's right.
So under the one big beautiful bill, it looked like a lot of these items were going to be outside the purview of the NFA, and they were going to be treated similarly to other firearms and not have to go through this process.
Right.
And what did we end up with when it was all said and done?
Well, this goes back to how the sausage is made, right? So if you recall in the House, so all these, the one big beautiful bill is a reconciliation bill. So it deals with the budget, which constitutionally, I believe, has to begin in the House. It was H.R. 1. So this was the budget bill, the reconciliation bill. And in the House, at the same time, there were two independent bills, the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act. And one was, to get suppressors deregulated and off the NFA, and the Short Act was for short barrel firearms. So when the House bill and the reconciliation bill, we got the HPA put into the reconciliation bill. Understanding being, because it's a tax, it may survive scrutiny because it's a reconciliation bill. And originally in the House, it was just an elimination of the tax. But GOA's efforts, it had the full repeal. We had the full repeal put in the House bill. So enter the Senate. Reconciliation bill goes over the Senate. Because of our efforts, not only were suppressors put in the bill, but we had the short barrel firearms put into the Senate bill. And it wasn't just eliminating the tax, it was eliminating the registration requirements and tax, the whole enchilada. Now there was a hurdle, and that hurdle involves something called the Byrd rule. I don't know if your viewers may or may not know about this, but the Byrd rule is there so non-budget items don't get sneaked into the reconciliation bill to avoid a filibuster. So, the Senate is a weird institution. So you need to have 60 votes really in the Senate to pass something if you have a standalone bill. And the reason is somebody, the opposite sides, people who oppose it can filibuster it, basically time out the clock on the bill. And so in order to beat that filibuster, you have to have 60 votes, which is called cloture, right? So that was in the bill. And so what the Senate parliamentarian does is that person her name's Elizabeth McDonough, appointed by Harry Reid in 2012, a Democrat, looks at all the stuff that's in the reconciliation bill and then decides what belongs and what doesn't, right? What fits with the budget, what fits in. And so Elizabeth McDonough ruled that the HPA and the Short Act violated the Byrd rule. She said it was outside the scope of the budget. So the only way for us to overcome that, either to waive it or to overcome it, was to have 60 votes. That was impossible. The other thing that could have been done is that John Thune could have fired the parliamentarian, or Vance could have overridden her. And we pushed hard for that. Did not happen. So because that didn't happen, she took it out of the bill. So they put back in the $0, right? So the $0 amount passed the Byrd rule scrutiny, right? So that's how we got to where we were in the Senate. So we wanted to get her fired. We wanted to advance to overrule her. And so it didn't happen.
The federal government recently began processing applications under the 925C Relief from Disabilities program. If you're federally prohibited from owning and possessing firearms, you shouldn't wait. You have to act now while this program's available. Visit us at thegunlawfirm.com and schedule a free case strategy session to determine whether you're a good candidate. Back to the episode. Was there any precedent for the person being fired? It's interesting how this person stays throughout changes in administration, changes of political makeup.
Yeah, it happened in the Nixon administration. There was somebody who was fired previously, but it doesn't happen too often. And I think Thune kind of ruled it wasn't going to happen. He just wasn't going to do it.
Why?
They didn't want to set a precedent for doing this. They didn't want to go nuclear. They don't want to. They always think this way, that somehow the Democrats are going to treat them fairly when they're in the minority.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Sure. So they're going to end. That's the thing. If Schumer's in charge again, he's going to end the filibuster, and then the Senate becomes like the House. And I realize that cuts both ways. But for us, we want to stop gun control. The easiest way to do that is have 60 votes. You need the other side needs 60 votes, and it's really hard to get. But like I said, it cuts both ways. It makes it hard for us to pass pro-gun legislation. So anyway, that was eliminated. I mean, the registration part, but the zero tax stayed. And it passed the Byrd rule. It went back to the House. We weren't done yet. We said so. Andrew Clyde, Representative Clyde from Georgia, 9th District. He decided we wanted him to put the full repeal back into the bill and send it back over to the Senate. Didn't happen in committee, and so it ended up passing, and we got the $0 tax. So that's where we are now with it. So there's a lot of criticism that's floating around out there about what GOA may or may not have done. And let me be clear, we were 100% right from the start repealing, getting suppressors and short barrel firearms out of the NFA, 100%. And we didn't stop fighting for that until the end. The problem is if you don't have 60 votes, we would have lost everything in the Senate. We wouldn't even have got the $0 tax. So now that we have the $0 tax, this sets us up for a lawsuit. And as you know, the case was 1937, was Zorinsky or something like that. Was the name of the Supreme Court case. So in 1937, the NFA, which passed in 1934, was challenged, right? And it was challenged on the fact it was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court ruled, no, it's constitutional because it, at its core, is a tax. I believe I'm summarizing that right. I know, and I'm not an attorney, but I play one on TV sometimes. So I'm not, but it's like, so they decided it was a tax, and because it was a tax, it was constitutional. But now, wait a minute, there's $0. So now the basis of GOA's lawsuits, in conjunction with our industry partners, we were the first to file it. We filed this lawsuit on July 4th, on Independence Day. Our argument is this: if you have a $0 tax, there's no tax consequences in this bill. Therefore, the National Firearms Act, at least as it applies to suppressors and short barrel rifles, is unconstitutional. It has its registration with no tax. It has no taxing authority. Would you agree with that assessment?
I actually brought this up when there was that tax forbearance for the AR pistols being registered as SBRs. Because how do you have a tax law that doesn't impose a tax? Right. And this does it in a more permanent way. So I think the argument is even stronger, because Congress, when they enacted the National Firearms Act, it was based upon the authority to tax. And people often forget that Congress has limited, specifically enumerated powers.
Yes.
We live in a world where people seem to think throughout our entire country that Congress can do anything that it believes is a good idea, and the people get behind, which is simply not true. Constitutionally, Congress can only act in certain regards, one of them being the power to tax. Mm-hmm. You've got interstate commerce, which they've completely blown out of proportion.
Yes.
And that wasn't the case in the 1930s the way it is today. Mm-hmm. Because today they'll use 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon to get to how does this affect interstate commerce.
Right.
And it's easier for them to make those arguments with how mobile the world is and the internet and how much commerce does happen among the states. What isn't involved with or affecting interstate commerce. So they really use that to try to regulate everything. But Congress does not have a general police power the way states do. States can enact laws essentially that they think are a good idea as long as they don't violate any other portion of the Constitution, state or federal level. Congress doesn't have that authority, specifically enumerated powers. And if taxing is the power that was used in order to found this law, if you get rid of the tax part, that really gets rid of the foundation upon which this law was allegedly constitutionally passed.
That's exactly right. And that's the crux of our argument. Now, I know the NRA and Second Amendment Foundation also have a lawsuit, but it has not been filed yet, so we don't know what's in it. But our lawsuit was filed immediately, and that's the argument that we're taking. Just what you said perfectly, much better than me, of course. And there's no foundation for the tax anymore. It's zero, and so now you have an unconstitutional registration scheme, and that's our argument. Now, whether that will extend to machine guns, because of the HPA and Short Act and involve that, I don't know. But I think this is a great opportunity. Of course, we filed that lawsuit in the Northern District of Texas. That's where the lawsuit was filed. So we're going to take it from there.
Thanks for tuning into the Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. If you want to be a proud member of the Garbage Gang, we need you to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out one of the recommended videos, and comment. Tell us what you think. We love having you as a member of the Garbage Gang. We'll see you next time.